My name is Tim Sink. I'm president of the Greater Concord Chamber of Commerce, and delighted that you could join us for our program today. My first order of business, I would really like to recognize and thank Ledyard for being today's sponsor. Without the generous sponsorship of businesses like Ledyard, we wouldn't be able to put on programs like this. So please join me in recognizing our sponsor. A couple of quick announcements. We have, for those of you who would like to get re-engaged with the Chamber, you're wondering, hey, could I get a review of our member benefits, or what kinds of committees are operating at the Chamber? How can I get more engaged? We do regular member briefings. We have one scheduled for Wednesday the 17th at noon at the Chamber. That's a free lunch. We just need to know that you're coming, so we'll set a place at the table for you, a 1-hour meeting. So Wednesday the 17th, give us a call if you'd like to attend that. If you have lunch with us that afternoon and you want to have a beer with us that evening, Concord Young Professional Network will be meeting at Litherman's Brewery here in Concord. All are welcome, whether you consider yourself a young professional or an older professional. On that same line, the Young Professional Network will reconvene with a wellness series on January 23rd at 5:30 at the Center for Health Promotion. That is upstairs at the Smile Building at 49 South Main Street. You may want to mark your calendar for February the 22nd. That is still a little bit of a tentative date, but probably likely go. Governor Sununu will join us for our State of the State, our annual State of the State address at the 22nd of February at the Croponi Conference Center. You'll get an invitation to that soon. And then finally, I want to let you know that the Business Showcase, our trade show that we do every year at the Croponi Conference Center, is scheduled for March the 19th. Registration will open for that very shortly. Space is very limited. We typically sell that out, so if you get an invitation to get some space at the Business Showcase, you may want to make that reservation on the early side so we can assure that you have a spot. It is now my pleasure to ask John O'Dowd, who is Senior Vice President and Director of Client Relations for Ledyard Financial Advisors, to come up and welcome you and introduce our speaker. So, John.
My name is John O'Dowd. I'm Senior Financial Advisor for Ledyard Financial Advisors, a wealth management division of Ledyard National Bank. We are now in Concord, over on 1 Pillsbury Street. The bank started out up in the Upper Valley, and so we're thrilled to be able to sponsor this event and have a place in the Concord market. But many of us have already been in the Concord market, so this is extra special nice for many of us within the organization. So please let me allow myself to introduce Commissioner Arlinghouse. The commissioner is actually the 18th Commissioner of Administrative Services in the state. Charlie got his degrees at William and Mary, the University of New Hampshire. He and his wife, May Lynn, and their son, Henry, live in Canterbury, the home of Canterbury Shaker Village, beautiful part of the state. So in preparation, I took a look at the state website, and I pulled up the organizational chart. And I got to tell you, I got anxious just looking at that, Charlie. We have the commissioner at the top and a slew of sub-agencies, or however they're phrased, a number of responsibilities that Charlie has to oversee the running, really, of the state. Just prior to his being named commissioner back last year in May, Charlie was the president of the Joshua Bartlett think tank, for lack of a better word. And so from facilities to budget to construction projects to procurement, which quite frankly, Commissioner, I'm not sure what that word means. So to health care programs. Just an enormous amount of responsibility, so we are very thrilled, both Ledyard and the Chamber, to have you take time out today to speak with us. So everybody, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Commissioner Arlinghouse.
I'm often here blathering on about the budget or some other thing, and And now I are the budget, as they say. No, it's so I became commissioner in June, and it's a wonderful, wacky, crazy department that I'm in charge of with a really great staff. But we do, as was pointed out, we do state budget office as part of administrative services, so our accounting services. So for example, the state's annual financial report, the CAFR, was released just a couple days before Christmas. And that was one of our biggest, most difficult accomplishments. That's in our department. The department actually started as the Office of the Comptroller in 1931 because somebody in the 30s decided that the state ought to at least have a budget and track it rather than just kind of spend what they wanted and kind of hope for the best at the end of the year. It's actually remarkable to think about it. You know, when you start heading an agency, you start to look at what it used to do and how it got there. And that's one thing, is that, you know, I looked it up and I thought, oh, it's Office of the Comptroller in 1931. What did they do before that? Or you know, why did that happen? And, you know, it's a kind of a reform-minded thing where people said, you know, they would allocate some amount of money and then just kind of hope you spent it, and there wasn't an organized budget. We looked at it and went, oh yeah, maybe, yeah, we'll give you $4,000 and they can get 12, and let's kind of see where we are. And sort of toward the end of the year, the agencies would come back and say, yeah, no, that's plenty of money, or they would say, yeah, we need a little extra. And when the government is really, really small, that works. But as it gets larger and does more things, that doesn't work so much, because eventually people figure out, well, you know, at the end of the year, you got extra money. So why don't I just come back at the end of the year and say, I need extra money? And they're like, oh, wait a minute, we're running into trouble here. And they developed a budget. They actually had an auditor once in 1911, they passed an auditor, and 4 years later they repealed it, because there were a bunch of people who didn't like it because that person kept looking over their shoulder at the books, which, God forbid. One of the places, so in looking back, you know, our span of activity includes building and grounds and public works and organizing things. And you look into kind of where things used to be. For example, our Department of Public Works, which is currently co-housed with the Department of Transportation on the Heights, our division of Public Works under Admin Services. At one point does everybody know the Concord Co-op on Main Street? So that's where it used to be, in that building. I was looking at historical documents on what every building in Concord used to be. And I think there's something like 35 buildings that are the old New Hampshire Savings Bank building. And that it's not actually true, but they're more than I thought. And one of them is now the Department of Justice, which is now a state building. But you look up these things. Well, at one point there was the keeper of the State House was a separate office who was overseen by the governor and council, who would kind of meet and go, yeah, you know, lawn looks long. Why don't you mow that Friday? And because that's what they did at one point. They're like, you know, can we put a tree over in the corner here? And you can picture the councilors and the governor sitting around and going, yeah, that looks nice. Maybe a rose bush too. And then it got a little bigger than that, and they put an addition on, and someone's like, you know, we really ought to have somebody come in and sweep the floors. And that got a little bigger. And then there were a couple of more buildings, and they established a superintendent of building and grounds instead of just some random guy meeting with the council every now and again. And that got bigger and bigger, and there's a law that says he's in charge of, as long as we're in Concord, he ought to be in charge of, well, the Franklin Pierce Homestead in Hillsborough, he should be in charge of that, and the Hannah Dustin Memorial in Pennacook, he should be in charge of that too, because that's I don't actually know now that I say that, I don't know who's in charge of that now. And I don't think we do that. Okay. And then they add another building, and then they hired people to sort of supervise the state institutions. And if you think about the way the state of New Hampshire impacts with the city of Concord, a lot of it is related not to direct planning, where at some point, you know, three people with degrees from UNH got together with a giant flow chart of the city and went, well, traffic should move here, and we should have 4 buildings, and these should house these functions, and these should house these functions. At some point, we had this giant complex of hospital buildings up off Pleasant Street, and as we were shutting some of that down and modernizing some of that, and taking care of people who have issues in different ways than we did in, say, 1890 or 1920, people went, there's a lot of big old brick buildings. Maybe we can put stuff in them instead of housing them around the city of Concord. And so that becomes the state office park. And you're like, wow, the state office park looks just like a mental hospital. Leaving aside how fitting that may or may not be. That's kind of how things develop. And so, like a lot of development, things just sort of happen over time. One of the most important agencies in the city of Concord, the Department of Justice, is in a building that they happened to get a hold of because the bank who was running it got tired of it. And someone went, "Ooh, that's right next to the State House. Let's grab it." And so, and frankly, if you've ever been to the Department of Justice, I hope very few of you have, or at least you were just there visiting a friend. But you walk around the inside and you're like, "Oh, I can see how this wasn't built for this purpose." In fact, the building I'm in, the State House Annex is what we call it now, was built in actually two kind of stories about growth. In 1910, they built a giant addition on the back of the State House, giant addition for 1910 purposes. Now we would regard it as a little addition. Our State House is tiny by most state standards. But the huge addition on the back that added tons and tons of space was intended so that the entirety of state government could be housed in the State House. And in the 30s, late 30s and early 40s, Francis Murphy was governor, and he was annoyed because, well, we no longer all fit in the State House, shocking as that may seem. And he thought, this is terrible. People are running around town renting from landlords, and we can't, no offense, Steve Dupree, we can't have something like that. God forbid you should rent from people. And they thought, let's build another building and try to put everybody in it. So we may not fit in the State House, but we're going to build a new executive office building. And, FDR was a big fan in the late 30s of building a lot of stuff with federal money, which is why it looks the way it does. And so that was the office building that was supposed to house the entirety of the rest of state government. And as you know, it still doesn't. So because it still doesn't, there's a lot of stuff going on. And I want to tell you a little bit about some of the projects that are going on that most of you see. And a little bit about some of the projects that you don't see, and maybe a little bit about why you don't see more or why you might see more. I'm going to start with my favorite project. My wife and I live in Canterbury now because in 1992, is Phil Emma here? There he is. So in 1992, we bought Phil's house. And it's actually one of the weird things. One of the early things I did as commissioner is I'm signing a document. I'll talk about Concord Steam in a minute, but we have a steam tunnel that goes through one of the Merrimack County Savings Bank buildings. And as a result of it, people prepared, I signed like 8,000 pieces of paper every day. And I try to read at least 2 or 3 of them. And this one I happened to read in Merrimack County Savings Bank, and this document signed, Philip Emma, President, Merrimack County Savings Bank. And then I signed it, and I said to the person who gave it to me, I said, the last document that both of our names were on was the house I bought in 1992 that I'm still in today. So nice job on that. But before that, we lived in Concord. We had an apartment on Center Street. And Concord is a great city. It was a great city in 1991. And, we're sort of halfway up the hill on Center Street on a second floor apartment. And you look over and you see steeples and the State House, and it's kind of a neat view. There's a lot of Concord, though, that you look at and you're like, oh, this could be so much nicer. And for 25 years, that thing for me, which was in this very neighborhood, was the Merrimack County Courthouse. The Merrimack County Courthouse is a nice building. That originally the courthouse and City Hall. If you look up old pictures of the building, there's a great history of the city library. That has a picture of the old building when it had a dome on it, actually. I guess they took that away because they didn't want people getting confused with the State House. But city moved out at one point, and the county took it over entirely from them. But since 67 or 70 or whatever, there was this hideous, and my apologies if you had any role in building this disgusting looking bunker in front of it that I guess was the probate court. And for 25 years, I would say to my wife, this is the problem with America today. Just how a lot of my conversations with my wife start. And she, and stop me if this resembles your own marriage in any way, would say to me, mm-hmm. And but I would say this beautiful, historic old courthouse with this monstrosity from the 1970s stuck in front of it. And at one point, I wanted to expunge the 1970s from the world, which we started to do. So if you know that project, Steve is intimately involved in this project because we're building a new courthouse, and he was instrumental in making sure that the new courthouse was not up on the heights, but downtown. Downtown will be thriving and vibrant. It's actually a great thing, right? When the city and the state and the county, in this case, and the community are not in opposition to each other, where somebody goes, yeah, we're going to build a building where nobody can find us or get to us. Instead, we build a building where there are going to be people running around, and God forbid, they might actually leave the building in the middle of the day and go buy lunch at a business. And we want a thriving downtown. Well, the first thing we did was blow up. I was actually sad that you didn't actually blow up the probate court, because I had tickets. I had neighbors. There's always a problem with neighbors, isn't there? But it's just this wonderful thing, and you know, people have come up, and I'm sure you've had this experience. People have come up and say, "Oh, that's so wonderful," and they built. Is that the new courthouse? And that's an attractive building, and people had stopped noticing it. But this is an example. I mean, one of the things the state is doing. We're building a number of courthouses around the state. We're making an effort in current times to try to make them not hideous. If you're going to build a building and put it on people's landscape, you want it to be attractive. It's a new building going in Milford. It's going to have Milford granite as part of it. Milford is apparently, I didn't know this until 2 months ago, the granite town of the granite state. Did you know this? They shipped granite down for I think it's the U.S. Supreme Court, and at one point all the best granite in America came from Milford, New Hampshire. At least that's what they say in Milford. But the new courthouse there, it's going to incorporate, you know, local granite, local art, and things like that. Hampton is the same way. It's going to be, you know, part of the community in a nice area, and we're doing things like that to, in essence, to try to be a good partner with this, with people around the state. Every year there are a limited number of capital projects. The state has a limited amount of money. In some states, because when you build stuff that you notice, everything you notice is probably a capital project and not done through renovation and not done through general operating expenses, but it's a capital project where we go out, we borrow money. The state doesn't borrow money at a very high cost, but there's a cost to it, and we pay it back over 30 years. And it takes time, but they limit that in New Hampshire to roughly about $120 million a year. And every year, the people who want to build stuff, the courts and the agencies of the state, and the legislature and everybody else have a list of projects that they would like to fund that resembles around $800 million. And we build $120 million. So every day you're going to hear somebody say to you, you know what I heard the state's thinking about doing? And they're almost certainly right. But it doesn't mean what you think it means. The state's thinking about doing a lot of stuff, and the state doesn't end up doing a lot of stuff. But now and again, they do that. One of the other big projects that affects Concord is related to steam. Anybody in a building that ever had steam heat in it? So the Concord steam utility, as you may know, went belly up. And that's actually a building that is owned by the state, and we're hoping to also blow up next year. We had, do people know, it's in relative disrepair because at the end of its life, the Concord steam plant invested less money perhaps in maintenance than a typical business might. Just leave it at that. But somebody drove by the other day, just to give you a sense of some of the things I deal with. Got a call from a guy going, yeah, the smokestack on Concord steam's leaning. And I'm like, oh, is this a tourist attraction? The Leaning Tower of Concord? Could we do that? Well, apparently that works in Pisa, but not very many other places. And so we have the wonderfully named Boston Chimney and Tower. It's a company you want to invest in, right? Boston Chimney and Tower. It sounds like you should invest in them, or they should be in a Dickens village. And they just a wonderful thing. But we had to have them come out and remove the top 35 feet of the tower, because as much as you save on demo costs, if towers fall down, apparently it's good to have raindrops falling on your head, but people draw the line at bricks. So that's something that happened. But Concord Steam is a project where, you know, as people in all their buildings have to worry about stuff and try to get heat in their building, because that's a big deal. Some weeks more than others. Today, not so much, but last week, kind of a big deal. It becomes this massive unplanned for project that's going to be $20 to $30 million of money over time to, from a state standpoint, all the buildings at the state hospital, all the buildings in the downtown loop, and a couple of random buildings around town all need heat somehow, and they need a new loop. People go under the streets. There are old pipes with leather fittings. Did you know pipes had leather fittings? I had no idea. Well, apparently old pipes aren't always made with metal and certainly not plastic, but they're leather fittings. Apparently that's also not as durable as it once was. And so those end up getting to be replaced. But we have to replace the smokestack. We have to put in things. One of the things you'll notice around town, if you know where Concord City Hall is, and I'm thinking if you don't, you probably shouldn't be here. But if you know where Concord City Hall is, right across the street from Concord City Hall, there are two things that look like semi-trailers. They're lovely. Those are temporary steam plants. It's a boiler plant, and that's what those are. They're two temporary boilers to power the downtown not the downtown buildings, the state's 6 buildings in the Concord Civic District, if you're keeping score at home. Those aren't permanent, but they will probably be in use for 2 winters. So you'll have, Jim Boulay was telling me how much he liked looking at them the other day. I might be paraphrasing what he said to me. In fact, I'm fairly certain that what he said to me you wouldn't want to, probably couldn't repeat here. No, he's actually a very good partner, but we talked about it. So one of the things we're going to do is we'll build a permanent plant because there will have to be permanent steam for that. So what are we going to do? Put a semi somewhere. Well, here's one of the things that we're looking at doing, and we're going to work with the city on this. In the corner there of Green Street and Green Street and School. Thank you very much. At the corner of Green Street and School, sort of kitty corner from where they are now, we're going to build a steam plant. It's actually going to be brick, red brick, oddly, which is the same color as City Hall.
It's actually going to be attractive.
It is actually going to be attractive. You've seen plans for it, and that's our goal: is to build something that is going to be stuck in a residential neighborhood. Because they're, some of them are houses, some of them are businesses right next to it. We want it to fit in. We want it to look right, and we want some input into that it not look like, oh God, that's that thing. And so this is something that we're trying to do. Long term, people have a lot of ideas for what to do there. A lot of people don't like the current Department of Justice building. The legislature would like a parking garage, for example. Steve Dupree is clapping. And I think what he's referring to is, are people familiar with the parking garage that straddles Storrs Street downtown? Just raise your hand, because just as a vote, if you think that's a particularly attractive use of space, can you? Exactly. And I will say this, though. Administratively, we put a request in the capital budget, or have the last few capital budgets, to not blow it up. I keep wanting to say blow it up, but we don't actually blow things up as much as I would like. But to take it down instead of trying to rehab it for another 2 years. But every 2 years it doesn't end up going through because the legislature votes in the capital budget and they're not sure where else they would park. Some people would like to park kind of where the Department of Justice is now. The Department of Justice has some issues with that because they would like a building. There's some talk in the long-term future about that area, that there would be another office building like the Department of Justice and some parking, so the legislatures wouldn't be all over the place, and Concord could eventually have Storrs Street back. There's some people who would like that. You could have a mime festival there. Tim's famous mime festival that he wants desperately. The noise ordinances probably wouldn't be impacted. And we can get there. So this is one of the things, I think one of the most important things that the state government can do, should do, is starting to do, and hasn't always done, is to think more about the community. For example, I think if we had done that more, we probably wouldn't have had an office park necessarily on Hazen Drive, populated with hideous 1970s buildings. Although I think in the 70s they didn't realize they were hideous, some sort of giant hallucinogenic phase in American history. And that's, at least that's what I think. There are other things, but the state is responsible for buildings around the state. I told you about Milford Courthouse, Hampton Courthouse. There are courthouses all around the state, and every year there are a couple of courthouses that are redone. Vocational buildings in various communities that are redone. Rochester is currently on the list. But there are other properties. What happened with the state hospital property, for example, here? There are other institutions like that. There was what was called an industrial school in Manchester, which is the home of some small bits of the state, and although the big one is the Sununu Center, which is just, if you think, I said to the, I probably, no, I should, it doesn't have, this isn't bad, I'll go ahead and say this. So I said to the governor, I actually had a proposal, because for 6 months I was the governor's budget director and, helped him put together a budget and deal with the legislature, and which is a treat in and of itself. And I'm like, the Sununu Center. I said, if you're going to get something named after you, and it's named after his dad, obviously. I said, why do you want juvenile prison named after you? Is this really what? Didn't you guys have a say in this? Couldn't somebody say, oh, wait till like the DMV is open? And but it's the Sununu Center. So you're regularly in hearings, and people talk about, well, I talked to Governor Sununu about the Sununu Center, and you're thinking, yeah, I wonder how that went. And but it's the juvenile prison. I'm sorry. I guess we used to call it the Youth Development Center, and it's not a juvenile prison. I don't mean that, but geez, that's an old state property that we keep an eye on fixing up. And try not to let every building deteriorate, and figure out with the community what uses there are. One of the other major institutions in the state that has been used off and on for state office buildings, there was what was called the Laconia State School, and it had various names, most of which I won't go into because they're vaguely offensive now. And it was a wonderful thing that was closed, but there are a bunch of wonderful brick buildings on a beautiful piece of property on a hill with gorgeous views of lakes. Because at one point an active farm was part of it. There's a building called the Pig Barn, which I think is where they used to, because I'm clever this way, I think it's where they used to keep pigs. And but if you walk around that campus, and we don't let people do that anymore, but shortly before we did, I walked around the campus, and you look at the buildings, and they're giving me a tour to give you a sense of the problems with it. And so I'm going in with a couple guys, actually 4 people from my team, and hearing about the history of it, and you got to wear masks because there's mold everywhere. So, and it's it's kind of like the mask I use when I mow the lawn, but it's just like another notch up from that. And so we're about to go in a building. We're walking along, and the one guy turns to me, and he looks, and he goes, "Don't touch anything." And I'm like, okay. And so we're in a building where I can't touch anything, a building that no one is allowed to go in anymore, because one of the guys who was oddly on that tour kind of broke out in mold issues, and the 3rd antibiotic that he took worked. I say this to say that keeping up those buildings was never a priority of anybody's, because we weren't going to use them for anything. But now we can't use them for anything because they were never a priority of anybody's. And they became infested with mold. They have lead paint. They have asbestos. They have 3 other things that I don't know the names of. Steve might know. He does that for a living. And we can't use them. There are a couple of buildings. One beautiful building on a hill. I think it's called Spalding. It's a brick building. It's very nice. And you think, wow, this would be a great, I mean, not for my office, but probably we have to tear it down, except we can't tear it down because it's really, really expensive to tear down buildings that have mold and other things in them. A couple of buildings that we didn't go into even then. Someone's like, well, we're not going to go in here because if the roof fell on us, it would be bad. Which is, it's kind of a lesson in life. If the roof falls on you, it's bad. That's just a general principle you can take with you when you go home. And it's very important. There is, passed in the budget last year, a development commission for that. A whole bunch of people from a whole bunch of walks of life, led currently by George Bald, who was one of the people who helped turn Pease from an airport that was falling apart, that the Air Force just went, yeah, we're not using this anymore, into a thriving economic activity on the seacoast. If you've ever been over there, it's a great thing. The idea is to try to do something up there. It's not in Portsmouth. It's not next to an interstate highway, so there's some aggressive issues with that. On the other hand, it has a beautiful view of 2 lakes, and that's something to look for in the future. Right now, nothing's happening, but that's a big deal with some hope in the future. And the last thing I'll talk to you about is that we all have good ideas for something the state should do with a building it has or a building it doesn't have, but should have. And I will tell you that it takes longer than you think. We are currently doing surveys of various agencies for suggestions to propose in their initial capital budget requests, which will be promulgated later this calendar year for consideration by the legislature next calendar year in a budget that will probably be passed by June 30th of 2019. that would then go to design and public works and people talking about for groundbreakings that would probably take place sometime in the middle of 2020. So, if you wonder why things take a while, the wheels of government often move very slowly. I would like, during my tenure, to speed that up a little bit, because it seems like you could beat 3 years. But, so that happens a lot. So a lot of things that you think might be done are currently only a twinkle in people's eye. All right, everybody have a great day.
Thank you, Commissioner. That's a pleasure, as always, having you here. Really appreciate your time. Thanks again to Ledyard, John, and Jeff. Thank you very much for your sponsorship. And mark your calendars, February 22nd for the State of the State. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.